Ye Gods by Tom Holt. Chapter 12. That's 6 and 2 makes 8, doubled for a free go, plus 6 penalty points because you revoked on the bidding, plus 6 above the line for a straight flush, plus 15 for a clear round in Mercury, plus 3 bonus points for breaking service makes... Demeter had run out of fingers. Damn, she said. Right, that's 6 and 2 makes 8. 46, said Minerva, coldly. Can we get on now, please? Oh, yeah, Demeter added, and another 2 for passing Novgorod. 48. Minerva gave her a look that would have kept milk fresh in the Sahara. 48, then, she said. Now. And, Demeter said, another one for having 2 options in play during the same contract. 49. Fancy, Minerva replied. Now, if you've quite finished with the dice, perhaps I might have a... She threw, and the dice clattered onto the marble floor of the sun. Oh, hard luck, Min, Demeter commiserated. That's the 3rd time you've done that. Yes, Minerva said. I had noticed. Thank you. Not your day today, is it? Indeed. Now then, Demeter scooped up the dice, blew on them, where did she get into that dreadfully common habit, Minerva wondered, and threw them, not omitting to shout, ha! At the approved moment. Oh, look, she said, 9 again. I'm having a good day, aren't I? If you throw 9 one more time in this turn, Minerva said distantly, you go to Hades for 3 moves. Well, Demeter replied, that's hardly likely, is it? It was hardly likely you'd throw it the last 3 times. Fool's luck, Demeter replied cheerfully. Well, isn't that fortunate? You're just about to invade me, and now I can invade you instead. Jolly hard luck, Min. Minerva closed her eyes for a moment, just long enough for a goddess to count to 10. Well, never mind, she said. It's only a game, after all. The very thought of Minerva regarding it as only a game was too much for Demeter. She sniggered, and then she invaded. It's really not your day, is it? She said. Look, all your armies have run out of petrol on the other side of the desert. Now, if that isn't just the rottenest possible... Minerva stood up. How you can sit there wasting your time with this frivolous nonsense when there's important work to be done completely amazes me, she said, and sniffed. Demeter looked up. Want to give it a rest for a bit, do you? She said. I do think that in the circumstances... You're losing, you mean? I am not losing. Yes, you are, Demeter replied. But since it's only a game, what do you care? Actually, I wouldn't mind a few minutes' break myself. Cheerio! And having ostentatiously noted the positions of the pieces on the board, Demeter wandered away in the direction of the kitchen. As she sat and stared at her stranded army in the flowing, trackless sands, Minerva found herself thinking, and not for the first time, that it was a pity that Demeter had come into being several million years before Australia did. Otherwise, she felt they would have been made for each other. Frivolous nonsense, Minerva reminded herself. Instead, she would go and find out what was happening and do something about it. Better to observe the passage of events. She climbed the spiral staircase to the observation saloon and sat in the viewing chair. From there, thanks to a freak refraction of light through the atmosphere of a profoundly bizarre Betamax world, it was possible to see the minutest details of what was going on the surface of the earth. Minerva leaned forward in the chair and concentrated on a certain spot in the Caucasus Mountains. And what she saw was... For the first time in a long time, a very long time indeed, Mars was beginning to think that life wasn't such a pain in the neck after all. Fighting he didn't hold with, but he was a born organiser in the way that profoundly disorganised people often are. Without pausing to pluck the untidy desk and overflowing cupboard under the stairs out of his own eye, he delighted in sorting out the messes of others. Give him a clipboard, a box file, and 7,000 little yellow stickers, and he was happy as a lamb in springtime. All right, he was shouting. What's the hold-up? Get that lot unloaded and down to base camp too, and look sharp about it. There's 15,000 tons of prefabricated girder bridge trying to get through. Oh, for crying out loud, you pillocks, not that way round. And who forgot to bring the butane cylinders? The forms, stripped to their shirt sleeves and sweating despite the cold, ignored him. In their opinion, in order to lynch one heavily chained titan, there hadn't really been any need to bring 105,000 tons of pretzels, 8 million forage caps, 47 million reams of white A4 duplicating paper, 59 miles of 3-core electric flex, and 70,000 soldering irons. Someone, they felt, had got just the teeniest bit carried away. As for the piano, Stupidity, promoted for the day to the rank of staff drum lieutenant, tapped Marge gingerly on the shoulder. "Sir," he said. "Excuse me, sir." "Yes." "What shall we do with the piano, sir?" Marge glowered at him. "Put it in the Mobile Officers Club," he said. "What do you think?" "But, sir," said the form, "we didn't bring the mobile officers." "You what?" "It wasn't on the manifest, sir," said the form. "Look." He thrust a clipboard under Miles's nose. The Widowmaker groaned. "Right," he said. "In that case, clear out one of those mobile field chiropody units, put in a few chairs and tables, get some bottles and some glassware, and a few cut flowers, and shove the piano in that. Whatever the hell happened to initiative?" "Sir," Stupidity saluted briskly, turned and wandered away, shaking his head sadly. Bloody amateurs. For his part, Mars sat down on a half-empty packing case that had contained 46,000 pairs of tropical weight nylon undersocks, licked the tip of his biro, and started to write. From C&C Caucasus Theatre to Divisional Commanders, Centralised Stationary Distribution. He was just getting nicely into it when a colonel of spectral warriors came and stood over him, casting a shadow over his page. "All ready to go, sir," said the spectral warrior. "Sorry?" "All units deployed, sir," said the warrior. "Weapons checked, intelligence reports received and analysed, ammunition distributed, sir." Mars looked up. So, said the spectral warrior, "do we go get the bastard, or what?" "Sir," he added. Mars wobbled nervously. "Are you sure everything's ready?" he said. "Positive, sir." "Don't you think it would be a good idea to have a final kit inspection and a general stock taking at brigade level?" "No, sir." "Lines of supply all in place, are they? Pontoon bridges all built?" "Yes, sir." "Everybody returned to their pink pension scheme questionnaires?" "Yes, sir." Mars swallowed hard. This was the bit he didn't like. "So," he said, "what you're saying is there's absolutely nothing to stop us getting on with it?" "You're correct, sir." "Ah," Mars replied. "Fine. Well done, everybody. Well then, I suppose we'd all better..." Just then, a tiny dot appeared in the sky. It was so small and so far away that you'd have thought nobody would have noticed it. Somehow, though, everybody did. "Hold it a moment, Colonel," Mars said. "What do you make of that?" The spectral warrior shaded his eyes with his hands. "It looks like an eagle to me, sir. And a man. And a dog, sir." Mars suddenly began to feel a very familiar feeling of being about an eighth of an inch away from the smelly stuff. "Well, don't just stand there," he snapped. "Get going, nail the little sot!" The colonel saluted and then turned back, perplexed. "By that, sir, do you mean the titan, or the eagle with the..." By then, of course, it was all too late. The dot had become bigger. It had also become 3 dots streaming through the air. 3 dots... "Fire!" Mars yelled hysterically, and nothing happened. Jason, meanwhile, had leapt from the eagle's back and was standing on a mountain top brandishing the sword. At his feet, the triple-headed hellhound was baying with 2 heads, and the third was sniffing something on the ground, directly under Jason's left foot, and overhead the eagle circled menacingly. "This is asinine!" Mars yelled at his huge, silent, foot-shuffling army. "There's 20 million of us and 3 of them! Pull your bloody fingers out the lot of you!" In the spectral ranks, nobody moved. As for the forms, they were all trying to turn back into figures of speech without anybody noticing. Stupidity hid behind the piano and, rather counterintuitively, began to pray. Then, from the divine ranks, a single figure stepped forward. "Who bloody Ray?" muttered the Widowmaker. "Now can we please make a start before the little jerk dies of old age?" Nobody paid any attention to him. 40 million eyes were fixed on the one black shape strolling easily up the side of the mountain towards Jason, the eagle, and the dog. In the snooker room of the Spectral Warriors Social Club and Institute, one can, if one has the necessary degree of masochistic nerve, hear all the nastiest, most stomach-churning stories in the world's repertoire. Approximately 72% of them share the same central character. For example, there was the occasion on which Jupiter put out a contract on the king of Trasimene, who had incurred the Skyfather's unquenchable enmity by wearing lemon socks with an old Corinthians tie. Owing to a complicated nexus of oracles, oaths, and rainbow-sealed covenants, the gods were forbidden to offer violence in any shape or form to Gorgeous II during his lifetime. So they sent for the one being in the Hall of Creation capable of dealing with the problem, with the exception of the air traffic controller at Athens Airport, unquestionably the most widely feared and hated being in the whole of the universe. And sure enough, 24 hours later, Gorgeous II had ceased to exist. Nothing was ever found of him, not so much as a trouser button or a fire-blackened cufflink. A consignment of 24 lavender silk cravats ordered by him from Jeeves and Hawkes were found on arrival to have dissolved into their component atoms and soaked away into the wrapping paper. Some said that he had worked it by travelling back through time, hanging around Gorgeous' mother shortly before she met Gorgeous' father, and so preventing him from ever being born. Others pointed to the appearance of an unpredicted bifurcation in the fabric of possibility, closely followed by a violent eruption of molten logic in Macedonia measuring 34.76 on the Richter scale, and the observation of a hitherto unrecorded star in the constellation of the Distributor Cap. Most people, however, just shuddered and tried not to think about it. There was a silence he could have filled cracks with by the time he reached the top of the mountain, and Jason could hear nothing but the sound of his own heart pounding. It wasn't a very pleasant sensation, since he could tell that this wasn't just ordinary let's get the blood moving along chaps pounding. This was the heart demanding to be let out. Hi. Jason replied. Not the snappiest of answers, perhaps, and maybe Boswell wouldn't have jotted it down if Johnson had said it of a Saturday night down the Cheshire Cheese, but it is worth recording as one of the few replies that he's ever received from a potential victim. Nice up here, isn't it? Well, good view. Apparently you can see Stavropol from up here, he said, staring out in entirely the wrong direction. On a clear day, of course, he added. Stavropol, he went on, is somewhere I've never been, actually. But they say you can get a really authentic shish kebab at Jagati's Cafe down by the railway arches. I mean, you can really taste the little bits of burnt wool and everything. I forget who told me that. He turned round, swung his arms, and appeared to do deep breathing exercises. Lovely air, too, he said, and coughed. Sort of crisp. Jason squeezed a little of this highly recommended air into his chest, past the other rather large blockage that had formed in his windpipe, but all he did with it after all that effort was to say, again. Sorry. Nothing? Well, he said, this is nice, isn't it? A tiny message wriggled up Jason's spine and clambered into his brain. This guy is scared, it said, and was immediately shushed by millions of nervous brain cells. That, presumably, is why it's known as the nervous system. Said he. They looked at each other. Just as Jason felt his bowel muscles starting to give up, not, of course, that he knew the meaning of fear, must have been something he ate, he made a slight whimpering noise, put both hands over his ears, and started to run back down the mountain as fast as his legs could carry him, or maybe just a little faster. One little brain cell inside Jason's head smirked and said, I told you so, and then wondered why he found it hard to make friends. Jason, meanwhile, was dashing off down the mountain after him, and when he tripped over his flowing black robe and sprawled headlong, Jason wasn't far behind. Yeah, he said, and curled himself up into a tight quivering ball, like a bald hedgehog. Come on out of it, you, Jason replied sternly. It's remarkable what an effect the sight of a cowering enemy can have on one's vocabulary. If someone had asked Jason right then for the word meaning painful emotion caused by impending danger or evil, he'd probably have replied seasickness. No. All right, said Jason. Suits me. The ball uncurled itself quickly, and Jason could see 2 eye sockets staring up at him from the recesses of his shroud-like hood. Please don't say it, he said. Jason blinked, but managed to keep his stern, remorseless expression steady and not giggle. We'll see about that, he replied. Say what exactly? The joke, he replied. Whatever you do, please don't say it. Not that I'm saying you wouldn't do it terribly well, but
Jason remembered. The joke, of course. Gelos's joke. The great joke. Joke of jokes. So that was what they were all afraid of. There was this guy, he said savagely, went into this hardware shop, right, and he... Don't panic, it's all right, Jason said. Just kidding about. But you tell your pals down there that the next time... Yes, right. Got that? He nodded vigorously. If he had a tail, he'd have wagged it, and that would have been Jason's stern, remorseless expression gone for good. Fine, said Jason. Now piss off. He scrambled up, gave Jason a look of pure terror, and then bounced away down the slope and into the serried ranks of spectral warriors, who retreated slightly. The eagle, who had been circling overhead, swooped down and pitched on Jason's shoulder. Ow! Jason said. The eagle ignored him and put his beak next to his ear. Eagles cannot, of course, whisper because of the bone structure of their beaks. Yeah, Jason said. Nice one. The eagle spread its wings and launched itself into the air. For his part, Jason straightened his spine, put his shoulders back, and faced the divine army ranged below him in the natural amphitheatre formed by the mountain slopes. He took a deep breath and tried to imagine he was wearing a loud check suit and a red nose. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason shouted. A funny thing happened to me on the way to Caucasus this evening. I was walking along, minding my own business, when this man... He paused and looked down. The spectral warriors, forms and gods had all gone, vanished into thin air, and he was alone, except for the three-headed dog, of course, and the eagle, who floated over and nodded approvingly. It's the way you tell them, it said. Look, said the eagle. Jason turned round. Where? He said. There, replied the eagle. Since eagles cannot talk, it naturally follows that they cannot have voices that are resonant with awe and reverence, so it must have been Jason's imagination. I don't see anything, Jason said. Are you sure you've... There, you cretin, said the eagle. I blow you. It spread its wings and floated off on a gust of warm air that had no meteorological foundation whatsoever. Jason stared hard, but couldn't make out anything. It was getting late and cold, and he couldn't really see that he was needed here anymore, and he was beginning to feel peckish. He thought of Beckian's diner. Then the mountain behind him cleared its throat. Listeners are asked to pay close attention to what follows, as the author cannot be held responsible for any sensations of disorientation or confusion which may result from careless listening practices. Jason, said the mountain, are you busy for the moment? Jason thought hard. No, he decided, mountains can't talk, and neither can eagles, for that matter, let alone three-headed dogs. In a world such as this, there is much to be said for staying in bed with your head under the pillows. Hello? He ventured. Yes, hello to you too, said the mountain. Are you busy for a moment? That depends, Jason replied. On what? On what you had in mind, Jason said. And if you're a mountain, will you please stop talking to me, because I can only have a very tenuous grip on reality at the best of times, and I am not a mountain. It's all very well you saying that, Jason said, but how can I be sure? You look pretty much like a mountain to me. What you are looking at is indeed a mountain, said the mountain. I happen to be behind the mountain. Does this clarify matters for you? Not really, Jason replied. Who are you? Prometheus. Little wheels went round in Jason's mind, and the result was 3 oranges and a Holt. Oh, he said. Yeah, right, where exactly are you then? Behind the bloody mountain, like I just said. Fine, said Jason. He made a quick estimate, give me half an hour and I'll be with you. In fact, it took him just under 20 minutes to get within sight of the Titan, thanks to a shortcut through a narrow ravine, which fortunately didn't say anything to him as he clambered through it. What kept you? Look, Jason had turned his ankle in the ravine, and accordingly he wasn't feeling at his most lovable. Would you mind just explaining? The chains? Said Prometheus. Yes, Jason replied. Aren't they? Aren't they what? Chains. Prometheus raised his head, uprooting a large tree, and looked at him. Just cut them, will you? In the back of his mind, the only part still capable of function, the right question drifted to the surface and bubbled uncertainly. Why? Jason asked. What do you mean, why? Prometheus said. Because they're stopping me from moving. That's why. Get on with it, please. But, Jason said, what I mean is, why should I? I tried to go into all this before, but things kept happening, and I never came to a satisfactory conclusion. Look, will someone please give me some idea of what's happening, because otherwise I'm going on strike. As it happens, there have been occasional strikes by heroes, the most notable being the withdrawal of the labours of Hercules. However, they rarely last long and never achieve anything, perhaps because all heroism is intrinsically unnecessary. When Hercules fell out with Jupiter following a breakdown of negotiations over unsocial hours payments, for example, Jupiter replied by drafting in contingents of forms who were able to do Hercules' feats in half the time and without terrorising supernatural wildlife or stopping every 20 minutes to beget children. On the other hand, it is felt that heroes marching up and down outside temples with placards looks bad, and in any event the demands of the average hero are so modest that we mean-minded not to agree to them. You can't, Prometheus said, however. The schedule's too tight. What schedule? Just cut the chains, Prometheus replied. Come on, will you? Oh, for crying out! Jason hefted the sword, or if that's a silly name for a sword anyway, whirled it round his head and sliced through the nearest chain. The shock of the metal biting into the adamant jarred every bone in his body. Ow! And the next one. All right, keep your hair on. It's not my hair I'm concerned about. If I cut through the next chain, will you tell me what's going on? If you don't cut through the next chain, I won't tell you what's going on. Ow! 2 down, 2 to go. Look, you'll find it over there, at the top of the mountain. It won't take you 1/4 of an hour if you run. But I see, Jupiter said. Big chiefs speak with forked tongue. It was obvious, to Mars at least, that Jupiter didn't see one little bit. Whether in the long run it would be worth making one last effort to enlighten him was something that Mars, who, unlike Apollo, is not a prophetic deity, could only guess at, and he guessed safe. All those forms, Jupiter continued, all those spectral warriors, all that overtime, and you ran away because, said the Thunderer, his eyebrows coming together, one mortal offered, I'm sorry, threatened to tell you a joke. Well, said Mars, yes, a joke, exactly. Jupiter stroked his beard, and the static electricity thereby generated would have removed the need for nuclear power in the industrialised nations for a century. Don't you think you might have been a trifle overcautious, all things considered? Played it just a little too safe? Mars straightened his back and shook his head. No, he said, definitely not. Jupiter raised an eyebrow. Nobody ever said definitely to him unless they were absolutely convinced of something or else had a great desire to be a frog. Perhaps, he said, we ought to have a board meeting. Mars, feeling like a turkey on Christmas Eve who hears that everyone has been converted to Jainism overnight, nodded and hurried out of the presence. He found Minerva in the sun lounge, lying on the sofa with her shoes off, reading Harper's and Goddess. She looked at him over her spectacles. Well, she said, where's the fire? Board meeting, Mars replied, in 10 minutes, in the great hall. Board meeting? Minerva swung her legs to the floor and put heel to sling back. What's happening, Ma? She said. There hasn't been a board meeting for 1100 years. He's not on about privatisation again, is he? Because I went through the figures and... Mars frowned. You'd thought it strange that Minerva had been lying around reading at a time like this anyway. It's the Prometheus situation, he said. What do you think? Look, I've got to dash. Ask someone else, all right? What Prometheus situation? I thought you'd... It was a washout, Mars replied quickly. So now... You messed up, you mean? Yes. How? Flare, Mars replied. Either you've got it or you haven't. Right. Minerva stood up briskly and marched out of the sun lounge. Oh dear, said Mars to himself. It's going to be one of those meetings. He found Apollo in the library, Diana in the gym, and Neptune beside the swimming pool, and then rushed off to find Demeter, who wasn't in the kitchen. Instead, he found Pluto making himself a cup of tea. Board meeting, he announced. You don't say, Pluto replied. Well, well. The spoon writhed between his fingers, hissed and slithered away behind the sink. Demeter turned out to have been in the kitchen garden, weeding the sunflowers.
"What's a board meeting?"
was her reaction, and when he explained, she asked if this would be a good time to raise the issue of rainfall allowances for the cloud shepherds. As he chased off to round up the rest of the quorum, Mars found himself speculating as to why he bothered. "Ye gods," he muttered under his breath. Clang! "Now," Jason said, "will you explain?" The earth shook. Slowly, very slowly, painfully slowly, the Titan flexed muscles he hadn't moved since before the destruction of Atlantis. He wiggled his toes, scattering topsoil in a whirling cloud. "Only," Jason went on, "so many downright weird things have been happening lately, with me all mixed up in them, and that unless someone lets me in on it all pretty soon..." Imagine the sound. The last thing we want is endless product liability lawsuits, and so we will only tax one area of sensory perception to the utmost limits at a time. The sound of a glacier scoring its way across a landscape at 40 miles an hour instead of its usual mile every 4,000 years. That's Prometheus getting to his knees. The next sense we will dislocate with sheer vastness is sight. Imagine a mountain rearing up in front of your eyes, stretching, complaining, and then standing upright. That's Prometheus getting to his feet. And finally, imagine the sort of earthquake you'd get if some gigantic and malevolent deity squeezed the earth like an enormous spot, sending molten magma spouting out of its half-eaten volcanoes, faults and fissures. That's what it felt like to be standing in the Caucasus when Prometheus landed after he jumped up, punched the air and yelled, "Yo!" at the top of his voice. "When you've quite finished," Jason said. The Titan looked down at the tiny dot below him and grinned. "Sorry," he said. "I'd love to stop and chat for a bit, but I have to get going. Ask the eagle. She'll tell you." Then, with a stride that arched over mountains, the Titan walked off. Far away, Jason could hear a sound like someone very tall and strong punching the palm of his hand with his fist and saying, "Right!" "Be like that," Jason said, and started to walk down the mountain. He'd gone about 30 yards when a foot the size of York Minster landed beside him. "Jason Derry." Metaphor is tricksy stuff. It's not actually possible to jump out of one's skin, but it's possible to try. Jason tried. It is you, isn't it?" The voice was slightly muffled, but that was because the words had to travel through a lot of thick cloud before they reached Jason's ears. "Has he gone?" Jason looked up. By craning his neck until he felt something give, he could just see, far up in the sky, a belt buckle. "Sorry?" he said. Then, for no reason at all that he could see, his lips arched into a grin, and he felt a laugh creep cough-like across his lungs. No need to ask who the tall person was. "Prometheus," said the voice of Gelos. "Has he gone yet?" "Yes." "Which way?" Jason blinked. "I'd have thought you'd be able to see him from up there." "You know how it is," said the voice. "My eyes aren't what they were. I can't pick out the tiny little details anymore. Look, time's pressing rather. We've only got 5 minutes before the orbits are lined up. So," Jason may have been small compared to Gelos, but by now he was so fed up that mere size didn't really matter. "Right, Buster," he said grimly. "Tell me what's going on, or I'll..." He set up at the mountain of toe cap that rose high above his head, "or I'll give you a chiropody session that you'll never forget. You hear me?" Gelos chuckled. "I won't tell you," he said, "but you can watch." A hand, we can tell it was a hand because we're far enough away to see it all in proportion. To Jason it was just a very big pink thing, reached down and very gently flicked Jason up into its own palm. "Which way?" the voice repeated. With a monumental effort, Jason hauled himself up out of a ravine that was in fact Gelos's lifeline. "Straight ahead," he said. "Head for that tall mountain over there." The enormous thing lurched forward. "Which mountain?" "The one you just trod on." "It's all right," said Gelos. "I can see him for myself now. Hey, Pro." Far away, Jason could see the Titan. It seemed to have grown. So, in fact, had Jason. Actually, all that had happened was that his brain had adjusted the field of view and proportion registers of his brain to enable him to cope with the scale on which he was now operating. Under normal circumstances, this would have taken several million years of evolution, but we can only assume that Jason was a quick learner. Anyway, we could see Prometheus, and above him he could see Gelos, and below him, very, very much below him, he could see the world. There was just about enough room on it for them both to stand, although very soon there wouldn't be. "Hold tight, Jason Derry." It sounded as if both giants had said it at the same time, and that wasn't as remarkable as it might have been, since now that Jason could see them both clearly, he noticed that they looked extremely alike, sort of like twins, or reflections in a mirror. No, let's stop pussyfooting. They are exactly alike, and now there was only one of them. "Excuse me?" Yes, there were two voices, but both speaking in perfect harmony, and coming from one throat. The two giants had merged. "Ah," said Jason, "nothing." "Excuse us," said the giants, "but we need our hands free, so if you wouldn't mind." Jason felt himself travelling through the air at devastating speed, and then what he could now perceive was a hand put him in what he was able to recognise as a shirt pocket. The pocket of a very big shirt, so big that the gaps between the weave of the cotton were large enough to fly an airliner through. Fortunately, the fibres of the cotton were as wide as the average motorway, and so there was no danger of falling through. And through the weave, Jason had a splendid view of what happened next. High above his head, he could see the stars, not as little points of light, but as huge balls of fiery gas. The planets of the solar system were so big that he felt he could reach out and touch them. But what he mostly noticed was the other Earths. We know them to be Betamax worlds, but Jason didn't. He just thought they were a lot of identical, fairly identical copies of the thing he remembered having seen on globes. One of these globes was swinging down through the firmament, dragging a moon behind it like a very fat lady with a very fat dog on a lead. The giants reached out a hand, grabbed hold of it, closed their fingers around it, and said, "Gotcha!" "Excuse me?" "Yes." "What are you doing?" The giant smiled. "Saving the world," they said. "Ah," said Jason. "Right." "Not this one, of course," the giants went on. "The other one." "Fine." "This one," said the giants, tossing the Betamax world up in the air and catching it, "is a right little tinker." "Really?" "Here," said the giants. "Look for yourself." "No, really," Jason said. "I'm quite happy to take your word for it." The giants laughed. "You wanted to know what was going on. You look and see for yourself. Here, catch." And the giants threw the planet to Jason, who, to his everlasting amazement, caught it. According to ancestral belief, Delphi is the dead centre of the world, or, as the ancient Hellenes so quaintly put it, the Earth's navel. On a hot day in high season, however, armpit might be a more fitting description. Betty Lou Fisicelli plodded from her office across the road from the museum up towards the temple site to post a day's messages in the usual place. Not that there was anything much. Is this a good time to invest in Far Eastern unit trusts? And congratulations, you have been selected as a lucky finalist in our prize draw. Didn't seem to her to be crammed with arcane significance and could probably wait. Nevertheless, a good Pythoness doesn't take it upon herself to edit, only to relay. When she finally reached the treasury of the Athenians, she found it deserted except for 46 French tourists, a 3-headed dog, and an eagle. Oddly enough, the tourists didn't seem able to see the dog or the eagle, but nothing tourists failed to notice surprised Miss Fisicelli any more. What did surprise her was that the eagle was there at all. "You!" she said. The eagle looked down at its talons and made a very slight but deprecating gesture. "How you got the nerve to show your beak here?" Miss Fisicelli went on. "After the way you—" She tailed off. The dog was looking at her. In fact, there was no anthropomorphic message in the dog's stare. It was just a doggy stare, plain and simple. But Ms. Fisicelli was nervous around dogs at the best of times, and a doggy stare in triplicate was not her idea of good vibes. Be that as it may, she pulled herself together. Well, if you've got anything to say, I'll be grateful if you got on with it. My time is not without. The eagle gestured with its head towards the tourists, who were staring at her. They seemed uneasy, and none of them had asked her to take a photograph of them beside the pile of fallen down masonry. In Delphi, this is tantamount to ostracism. Ms. Fisicelli sighed and led the way up the hill. On top of the hill at Delphi, there is a large Roman racetrack, trimmed tastefully with bushes. There, Ms. Fisicelli sat down heavily on a stone. Did we mention that the hill is steep? And said, "Well?" The eagle looked at the dog, who wagged his tail as if to suggest that it was incapable of speech, and none of this had been its idea anyway. It's amazing what can be communicated with a few inches of mobile fur-covered appendix.
"Hi, Betty Lou," said the eagle.
"Mary," replied Ms. Fisicelli, coldly affable. "How have you been keeping?"
"Oh, fine, fine," said the eagle.
"Look, I guess I owe you an explanation." "I guess you do."
"Well,"
said the eagle. It shifted its grip on the rock and winced.
"Look, would it be easier for you if I became human for a bit?"
"That's entirely up to you," said Ms. Fisicelli. "Far be it from me to dictate."
"Thanks,"
said Mary, shedding her feathers and donning a pale blue sundress with small pink flowers.
"My talons were killing me," she explained.
"So then," Ms. Fisicelli said, "you were about to say something."
"Yes," Mary replied. "Look, you've probably guessed or been told I'm Prometheus's eagle. You know, the one who was given the job of ripping the poor guy's liver out every morning and evening as part of his punishment."
"I am a graduate of 6 universities," Ms. Fisicelli interrupted. "I do know my basic mythology. Thank you."
"Sorry."
Mary repressed an urge to spring into the air, spread her wings, and scream. She picked at her thumbnail instead.
"Well, Pro and I, when you've known someone as long as that, you can't help sort of getting to understand a guy. And besides, what the gods did to him was wrong. He was only trying to help the mortals, and they stomped him. The gods don't like us, Betty Lou. They—"
"By us," Ms. Fisicelli said. "Do you mean humans or eagles?"
"Neither," Mary said. "Only themselves. You know about the first joke, don't you? And how they want to do away with comedy and take the world over again."
Ms. Fisicelli nodded.
"And you don't think someone ought to stop them? God damn it, Betty Lou, can you imagine for one moment what that would be like? A world with no laughter in it. We just couldn't survive."
Mary realised as she said this that Ms. Fisicelli had managed to survive for over 35 years in this cold, hard world without having a lot to do with humour. Probably she kept out of its way, and if she couldn't do that, she sort of stepped over it. But that, Mary felt, proved her point.
"Well," she went on, "we couldn't survive anyway, so Pro asked me if I'd help him, and I said yes, and so I sort of became his assistant and did all the legwork for him. It was fun. I enjoyed it. For one thing, he showed me how I could make myself human again, in fact, several humans. That's cool, except some of me gave me a pain in the butt. But never mind, I don't have to live with me after all."
Ms. Fisicelli remained unimpressed. "So?" she said.
"So," Mary went on, "we found this hero, an actual son of Jupiter, someone who'd actually have the nuts to defy the gods and cut the chains at the proper moment. And pardon me, have you got the right time there, please?"
Ms. Fisicelli showed Mary her watch face.
"Oh, that's good," Mary said, "because any minute now, Pro's going to be set loose, and he's going to put a stop to this downward laughter thing once and for all. And once that happens, Betty Lou, there's going to be big trouble."
"So I should think," said the Pythoness loyally.
"For the gods, I mean," Mary shrugged. "Me," she said, "I can't see what Pro's worried about. If you ask me, they've got it coming. But he says no, they're the gods. You've got to have them, so long as they don't interfere too much. Without gods, he says, who could we blame for things? He wants to save them."
"Save them?" Betty Lou gasped. "What from?"
"Themselves, mostly," Mary said. "You see, right now, they're having a board meeting. Have you the faintest notion what that means?"
Betty Lou shook her head.
Think of the end of the world, said Mary, with added bickering, and you'll get the idea. Once they discover what's happened, Jupiter is going to be very, very angry. He's going to want to start saying with thunderbolts. Now, these days, you can't do that. You start spraying thunderbolts about the place, you're going to set off all the nuclear early warning systems the superpowers aren't supposed to have anymore, and the next thing you know, it'll be goodbye Earth, and the gods will be so busy falling out with each other and accusing each other of cutting bits out of Sunday papers and leaving the top of the toothpaste, and they won't notice what's happening and stop it. And if the earth ceases to exist, then so do the gods. This is the world they're tied to. When it goes, so do they. Not us, Mary added. Them. When all the dust settles, it'll be them who aren't here anymore. We'll be all right. Why? Reality bifurcation, Mary said.
Ms. Fuzzicelli frowned. For a moment she thought Mary had said reality bifurcation.
Pardon me? It says, Mary replied, in Article 7 of the Universal Charter of Possibility that it's impossible for the gods to destroy the earth, the number one earth, except at the ordained time and through the proper channels. There's forms that got to be filled in, that sort of thing. Public inquiries, notices posted up outside town halls. What I mean is they can't just do it by accident. So what will happen is that an alternative world will come into being on which they do manage to destroy themselves and the world too. Of course, pretty short-lived world, huh? And then it will just happen. Only they won't be here anymore. The probability police will see to that, I'm telling you. Those guys are mean. You think death's a tough baby. You wait till you meet Sergeant Kowalski.
Betty Lou sagged like an Easter egg on a radiator.
You can't be serious, she said. They're the gods, Mary. Nobody can push the gods around. Don't bet on it, Mary said. Just think what happened to Woden.
Ms. Fuzzicelli fell silent and gnawed her lip, for Mary undoubtedly had a point. One of the first things young astrotheological students are told is a story of how, shortly after Woden, chief god of the now defunct Nordic pantheon, offended against the possibility regulations by restoring his dead son Balder to life on a Sunday without a resuscitation certificate in a residential area. He was abducted by 3 large, anonymous men in a blue and white chariot. His severed head was later found outside the palace of Offa, king of the East Saxons, who shortly afterwards abandoned the beliefs of his forefathers, accepted Christianity, and made a pilgrimage to Salt Lake City. The rest of his body was never recovered. The kidnappers were later identified as possibility policemen. Although nobody's ever been able satisfactorily to establish what actually happened to Warden, it is thought that they made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Ms. Fuzzicelli thought about it and shuddered until she resembled a brightly dressed blancmange on a speeding trolley.
But he wasn't a proper god, surely, she said at last. And anyway...
She fell silent. Somehow or other she had contrived to run out of anyways.
It's serious, Mary said. That's what Pro thinks anyway.
Ms. Fuzzicelli frowned.
So just what am I supposed to be able to do about it? She said. Easy, Mary replied. Just get Apollo down here before he has a chance to go to the board meeting.
Apollo? Ms. Fuzzicelli's eyebrows shot up like share prices in April.
Why him?
Mary grinned.
You'll see, she said. Do you think you can get in touch with him? Quickly, I mean, without all that fooling around?
Ms. Fuzzicelli shook her head.
No, she said. You know as well as I do how we go about invoking him. If you're right, there just isn't time.
Mary looked at her.
All right then, Ms. Fuzzicelli said. So there is a way, but it's more than my job's worth.
Mary looked at her again. These things are cumulative.
Betty Lou, she said, just what do you think your job will be worth if Apollo ceases to exist? Well, Betty Lou.
The Pythoness hesitated just a moment longer, and then she shrugged.
What the hell, she said. You can only be turned into a weevil once, I guess. You win.
Mary smiled as the Pythoness took a step to one side and prepared her mind for what was to follow. There are many different ways of summoning gods. You can sacrifice goats, or burn incense, or say mantras, or any combination of the 3. There are also complication invocation rituals, some of which we have seen. You can leave messages on the architraves of temples, or use the statue. By and large, the gods don't really mind being summoned in any one of these ways, because the summons is not binding, and they can use the divine equivalent of leaving the fawn off the hook. But if you use the one method which they have to obey, regardless of where they are and what they might be doing at the time, you are guaranteed to get a god, quite possibly a god in his pants and socks and without his teeth in, and more certainly a very, very angry god. Nothing, after all, gets the nose of an omnipotent being like being told what to do. What you do is, you put 2 fingers in your mouth and you whistle. Largely as a result of the enormous quantum increase in philosophical productivity caused by the introduction of the new technology, many of the fundamental maxims that make up the structure of the modern astrophilosopher's world model have required amendment and expansion. For example, Descartes' immortal conclusion, cogito ergo sum, was recently subjected to destruction testing by a group of graduate researchers at Princeton led by Professors Montjuic and Latbran, and now reads in the revised version to be found in the shorter Harvard orthodoxy. A, I think, therefore I am, or B, perhaps I thought, therefore I was, but C, these days I tend to leave all that side of things to my wife. Developments such as these have in turn served to make academics working in the divinity subjects more commercially aware, and many of them now retain the services of specialist ecclesiastical lawyers, accountants, and of course, agents. The leading firm of ecclesiastical representatives is, needless to say, Alfred Furbank of New York and London, whose Mr. Courtright represents, among many others, Betty Lou Fisicelli. Mr. Courtright is, understandably, a very busy man, and when he received 2 simultaneous calls from clients in mid-flight on his way to the annual theological trade fair in Frankfurt, he wished that he had been able to find a suitable assistant to whom he could delegate. However, the qualities required of a successful ecclesiastical agent are rarely met with. "Who?" he asked again. "Parson of Delphi on red," replied the New York switchboard. "Alistair Crowley on blue. He's on a payphone. They're both holding." Courtright shuddered slightly. Against his better judgment, the New York office had recently installed one of those gadgets that plays callers' piped music while they're holding, and some fool of a managing partner had chosen the Desiree as a suitable tune. "Something to put the fear of God into them," he'd said. He pressed the button. "Right," he told New York. "Put on Fisicelli, tell Addison no, not until I get the money, and then no more calls until we touch down. If anything else calls in with a burning bush, tell them to call the fire department." Click. "Betty Lou. Hi there. How's the prediction business?" "Mr. Courtright here. Mr. Courtright, can you get me access to all major networks, please? There's something very important I have to tell the world from Apollo." I didn't think it could get worse, Courtright thought, but I was wrong. "Betty Lou," he said, "we've all got something very important we've got to tell the world. Some of us do it by shooting the president, some of us take overdoses, some of us just make do with the phone-ins. The competition for airtime is very great at all times." "But this is important," Betty Lou said. "It's a genuine message from the gods, or at least one of them," she remembered. "He's putting himself in jeopardy speaking out like this. You have no idea how much trouble we'll be in when Jupiter finds out. At least we can do is make sure people hear him." "Are you sure about that, Betty Lou?" said Courtright. "I mean, it sounds to me it'd be a very bad idea from his point of view. And yours," he added. "There's this thing called credibility, you know, and I've been working very hard to build yours up. One little slip, like you going on the Johnny Carson show saying you've been hearing voices, and you'll think Joan of Arc had it easy. It won't just be the English who'll roast you alive, it'll be Newsweek and—" "Mr. Courtright," said Betty Lou firmly, "you have to arrange for me to broadcast to the world. If not—" "Yes," said Courtright impatiently. "Go ahead. Worry me." "Well, I hate to do this, but you have to understand—" "What?" "If you'll just look out of your window, Mr. Courtright." Courtright glanced out of the window. In the air, just above the wing of the Learjet, he saw what looked remarkably like an elderly car with a team of 4-winged horses attached to it by means of a complicated arrangement of transmission parts and drive chains. In the driver's seat was what Mr. Courtright instinctively recognised was a very angry sun god, who was aiming at him with a bow of burning gold. "Mr. Courtright, here, what do you think you can do?" Mr. Courtright looked at his watch. "Give me 15 minutes, okay?" he said. "We can syndicate it through one of the big agencies. They'll send someone over to the actual interview. Oh, and Betty Lou." "Yes, Mr. Courtwright." "Do you think you could ask your friend with the bow to back off slightly? Only one of his horses is trying to eat the wing of this jet, and if I crash, there won't be any interview at all. You got that?" "I'll see what I can do, Mr. Courtwright." Courtwright pressed the button, leaned back in his seat, screamed, and then pulled himself back together. When you started seeing God yourself, it was time to move over more towards the administration side of the business. He called up the London office. "Get me Danny Bennett," he said.